Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just click the link in the show description to support now.
Stop the presses, call your mama, your grandmama, your friend, your cousin, your neighbor down the street. Let them know that Inked Magazine is on the hunt for their next cover girl, and most important, let them know that Shayla M needs to be that cover girl. Okay, folks, I want you to do me a favor. Head over to Instagram and go over to the account Shayla's Gallery. That's ShaylaSGALLERY. Shayla's Gallery. Check out her bio because there is a link to the Inked Magazine cover girl search. Click on that. Vote for Shayla M. Let's help our homegirl become the next cover girl for Inked Magazine. It'd be fantastic. You know Shayla, she's a wonderful person. She has a fantastic and active TikTok, OnlyFans. You know, this is someone who absolutely would love to support and appreciate. And the best part, she'll come on the show and let you know about that. All right, so please, if you do anything this weekend, check out Shayla's Gallery on Instagram. Click on the Inked Magazine link in her bio and vote for Shayla M. That's right.
You're locked in.
Look at what we have here, folks.
To the only show that matters.
The cream of the crop.
Duke loves wrestling.
And there is no one that does it better than
Your host,
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass.
the Duke.
And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Welcome back to the Duke Loves Wrestling podcast, the show about pro wrestling and everything else. And let me tell you something right now, folks. Super Bowl Sunday is this weekend, and I just want to let you know that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to destroy those cheesesteak eating, no good so-and-sos from Philadelphia. I don't care what Adam B. from Foundation Radio says. All right? So that's a hot take for you. Any of you out there, Kansas City is going to destroy Philadelphia. It's not even going to be a close game. I do not see that happening in the end. It's going to be at least a touchdown and a field goal, at least 10 points. Kansas City is going to destroy Philadelphia. Just make sure you credit the Duke for letting you know that was going to happen. Man, I'll tell you, what a week we have, and it's not even over yet. I want to give some get well wishes to our friend Jerry the King Lawler. Poor guy had a massive stroke that shut down a portion of his brain, but he is on the mend. Thank goodness. He was actually communicating with loved ones. So, Jerry, you know, you've been on the show before. Appreciate you, man. Get well soon, for sure. And rest in peace to Leaping Lanny Poffo, a.k.a. the genius Lanny Poffo. This is the son of Angelo Poffo, who is a legendary figure in the pro wrestling world and, you know, former promoter and what have you. Also the brother of the Macho Man, Randy Savage. So next week, I am going to air an episode dedicated to the genius Leaping Lanny Poffo, including a fun story that was told on the show last year by Kiko Harris about the time Lanny Poffo, the genius, was flirting with Kiko's lady. So that's a fun story that I'm going to rehash there. But we're going to talk about his career because I think that there is an entire generation that may not know much about this guy, and he was a big deal, especially in the 80s and early 90s. Lanny Poffo was a big deal. So it'd be fun to talk about there. That's right. On this episode, we are going to be talking to Alexi Suplexi, who is the main squeeze of Vicky Dreamboat. And Alexi, you know, really interesting guy, fun to talk with about a whole host of things. You know, we didn't talk much about pro wrestling because we were talking about all the other cool things he has going on in his life. So if you like good conversation, good storytelling, this is definitely an episode that you're going to enjoy. That's right. But before we get into that, I do want to encourage you. I want to encourage you, if you watch anything this weekend, especially if you're pulling it up on YouTube, I want you to check out the promo exchange that Paul Heyman and Cody Rhodes had on this past week's WWE Raw. It was as good as you're going to see two people have in terms of an exchange. It's as good as you're going to see these days. I know a lot of people kind of going overboard saying, oh, it's the greatest. It's not the greatest. Stop it right now. But it's very good. And it got emotional. You know, both Cody and Paul had tears in their eyes when they were talking about Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, and some really personal stuff that maybe not a lot of folks realize, especially as it relates to the financial challenges that the Rhodes family had at one point when Cody was younger. You know, Dusty was really balling on hard times for sure. And folks like Paul Heyman helped reinvigorate Dusty Rhodes' career. So really interesting promo exchange between the two of them and you know, setting up the next chapter in this whole Roman Reigns tribal chief bloodline story and all the folks who are involved here. Because, you know, Cody is going to be in the main event at one of the WrestleMania nights against whoever the champion is. And is that going to be Roman Reigns or is that going to be Sami Zayn? Because at Elimination Chamber, which is up in Canada, Sami's going to be challenging Roman for both titles. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, you know, the road to WrestleMania is very exciting. And it's fun to watch and to see everything kind of fall into place. So pretty excited. I'm pretty excited to see what's going to go on between Lashley and Brock Lesnar. Because that is a main event anywhere and everywhere, no matter how you slice it. So the fact that that is either going to be at Elimination Chamber or it's going to be at WrestleMania, but you can bet that's a match that we've been waiting years to see. Can't wait for that to happen. And then you have Rhea Ripley, who she's going to be challenging for the Women's Championship, and it looks like she's going to be going up against Charlotte. That's going to be fun. That's going to be fun to run that match back. So there's a lot of things falling into place WrestleMania season. So, you know, it's a good time to be a wrestling fan. I know that AEW is trying to figure themselves out. They've been featuring more people, you know, different people. They've been featuring more male wrestlers of color as of late on their television programs. And, you know, they have to build those stars. People like A.R. Fox. You got to build these stars. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as it relates to that. Their ratings and their you know, live event attendance have really taken a dive since CM Punk hasn't been around. That's a fact, no matter what anyone tells you. But sometimes you got to take a step backward in order to take 3 steps forward. And if they continue to promote diversity, they still need to feature more women's wrestling, by the way. But if they continue to promote diversity, I think in the long run, they are going to find themselves in a position where they're a lot more stable as a promotion. So, you know, time will tell. They keep pushing the date back on that video game that they're going to put out, Fight Forever, which, hey, if you're making sure that it's going to be as entertaining as it possibly can be, I understand. I don't disagree with that because Lord knows you put out a piece of crap and people are going to call it a piece of crap. So, you know, do what you got to do, man, but make sure when it finally comes out, it's something worth playing. WWE has released their stills and a couple of videos for the latest 2K game that's coming out, and that should be out in March. So, you know, Fight Forever, they were building this thing all year last year, and they still aren't anywhere near a release. Meanwhile, WWE, they have the latest installment in their series. So, but, you know, WWE is building off of something that already existed. In AEW, they started from scratch. There was a change in the actual developers. So there was a lot of turmoil that was involved in that process. But again, hopefully whatever they come out with is something worth playing. You know, we're getting to the point where AEW's contract is going to be up in December. Their television contract with Warner Brothers Discovery is up in December. And then the network has the option to activate another year. So they could actually keep them on television technically till 2024 if they choose to. But there's no guarantees, man. Tony Khan, he's been making the rounds in the media trying to do what he can to make it seem like AEW's all right, they're stable, and he expects them to have a major increase when they get a new contract, wherever they end up getting a contract. But that all could just be, smoke and mirrors, man. The guy could be very concerned, and I think he should be, because this landscape is not easy to predict right now in terms of what's going to happen with television contracts. More people are still watching TV than anything else. More people are still watching TV. Internet streaming has not overtaken television viewing. Hasn't happened yet, but it's definitely cutting into the margins. There's no question about that. So whatever programming you put out on television, it needs to be able to draw a stable audience, especially when you talk about something like pro wrestling, which doesn't have an off season, so it's on all year round. So, in that sense, it's valuable. But on the flip side of it is, you got to put out a product that can attract the most diverse kinds of people, including children. And that's certainly not going to happen when you're cussing and you're bleeding and you're carrying on. So, AEW wants to present itself as more of an adult-themed product, and that's okay. But you just got to remember, man, if that's not going to generate enough advertising dollars for the networks, then how are you going to sell it? How are you going to get the contract that you feel you deserve? Because you definitely have a talented roster there. There's no question about that. But it's got to be something that can appeal to the most people. I think they made a huge mistake in their business model, focusing on just one particular type of fan. And it continues to hurt them, but it's clear that they're trying to figure it out. It's clear that they're throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. And I think that's great. So this isn't a beat up on AEW session right now. I'm pointing out that I recognize that they're trying to make some corrections. The thing is, Tony Khan, you got to stick with it. Don't shy away just because the results aren't coming right away. You got to stick with it. I'm telling you, though, the way to do it is diversity and inclusion, especially as it relates to featuring more women's wrestling, which is still something you're not doing. And that's why it's killing your company. It's killing your company because you're going to attract more people in the long run when you do that. Look at the WWE, the people who you claim to compete with. So anyway, I believe that AEW can figure it out. They just got to make it happen. So, and that starts at the top. Tony had, because his father is not the one who's making these day-to-day decisions. That's Tony. So Tony has to commit, man. So we'll see. Nick Khan of the WWE president, he said something interesting. He said a sale of the company could happen within 90 days. I don't think that's true. I think that's a little aggressive and presumptuous by Nick Khan, but that's what he claims. He claims, yeah, man, it could only take about 90 days to get a deal like this done. And certainly Nick knows what he's talking about. He's gotten major deals done in the sports and entertainment world, but I don't know. I'm still not convinced that it's going to be that simple for the WWE to just do a sale. So we'll wait and see what happens. But we do know that, they cracked $90 again on their stocks. Look, man, they're firing at all cylinders. They have never been more valuable than they are right now. WWE. So yes, this is the time to cash out. This is the time to sell. But you got to make sure who you sell it to is going to be a good steward and do right by the company if it's going to continue to be public. Now, if they're just going to take it private, then they can do whatever the hell they want. But we as fans, you got to face the reality of the fact that it's a business. This is not something that needs to cater to you as a consumer. You're not the priority. Not in the way that you think it is. Your entertainment is not a priority. The priority is how much money can we make off of this? Now, one of the ways to make money off it is to deliver on solid entertainment, and we see that. That's why the WWE is so valuable. That's why it continues to make so much money. That's also why a company like Impact Wrestling continues to fail. because no matter what they do, they're not consistent with delivering on solid entertainment that's sustainable. So we can see a major difference there in company philosophies and understanding of how to make a buck, for lack of a better term. But nothing is more important than the fact that it's a business first. It's not your entertainment fun time. Nobody cares about us in that regard. They care about how much money they can get out of us. And certainly the WWE is the circus. It's the greatest show on earth. It's just the way it is. So, selling the company and doing what they have to do in order to generate as much money as possible, continue to keep kids engaged as much as they can, things like that. Those are the focus. Those are the things that are paramount. And your entertainment and whatever storyline you like and who you want to see pushed and who you think should be champion, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. We as lifelong fans, especially we elder folks, they've kind of squeezed us as much as they can. They got to go after the kids, man. And it's always been that way. I think a lot of fans, they think that they're more important than they are. It's like, we're not. You, Mr. 30-plus-year-old, you're not that important. You're just not. Your kids, if you have any, or your little brothers or your little nephews or whatever, they're the important ones. They're the next generation. They're the ones. You could drop dead tomorrow. Those kids are likely going to stick around. They're the ones that they got to squeeze the dollars out of, got to get, they're the ones who are more likely to want to get the T-shirts and the toy belts and all that stuff. They're the ones. Squeeze them. And ultimately, that's squeezing you if that's your kid or if that's somebody that you care enough about to spend the money on. But you get my point. So, everybody wants to feel important. Everybody wants to be made important. But you just got to recognize you're important to you, but you're not important to the people who are making the buck. They just care about making the buck. And I think the more we come to grips with that, the better off we'll all be. So I'll just leave it at that. That's for sure. Definitely want to give a shout out to Mission Pro Wrestling. They got a big event coming up on Saturday. So you folks definitely check out Title Match Wrestling Network there for information on Mission Pro Wrestling's next event. I know folks like Tiffany Nieves is going to be in the house, which I'm pretty excited about. Vicky Dreamboat, I mentioned her earlier. She's going to be in the house for Mission Pro Wrestling's next event there on Title Match Network. So should be fun, man. I'm very impressed with Mission Pro. They continue to chug along. They continue to figure out how to find the best women's wrestling talent out there and feature them and put them in positions where they can be seen by these major companies. And certainly all you got to do is tune into WWE or AEW and you can see it. A lot of these women who wrestle in Mission Pro, they end up in these other places too. And they get signed. So there's something to it, man. If you want to see the next potential breakout star, then you definitely should be checking out Mission Pro Wrestling. So Saturday, February 11th, Title Match Wrestling Network there. The name of the event is Kickstart My Heart. That's pretty clever. It's going to be at least 8 matches featured there. So definitely check it out. I think tickets are still available. So you can head over to missionprowrestling.com for more information on that. But it should be cool. If you're down there in the Texas area, you definitely want to check it out. And that takes care of that. So we're going to take a quick pause for the cause. And then when we return, my exclusive conversation with the one, the only Alexi Suplexi. I want to remind you to check out Zencastr, Zencastr. That is my favorite program to use for all my recording needs. And the great part is, not only do they have audio, but they also have video options as well. So whether you're video conferencing, podcasting, just catching up with friends and loved ones, you definitely want to check out Zencastr. They have paid subscriptions. They also have a free version, which I'm actually using right now. Transcripts, the whole 9 yards, and even, get this, Zencastr has started to do hosting. So for all you podcasters out there, if you're looking for a host for your show, please consider Zencastr. You will not regret it. I'm telling you right now. Once again, Zencastr. Made on Zencastr. That's right.
Hello, everybody. I am Alexi Suplexi, most mighty Russian wrestler, and you are listening to Duke Loves Rasslin.
You know, folks, I love when I talk to interesting people, and certainly we've been spoiled with those types of guests here on the Duke Loves Rasslin podcast for close to 7 straight years now. It's crazy this show's been around so long. And you know, I listen out to certain things and make mental notes here. And when we had Vicky Dreamboat on the Duke Loves Rasslin podcast not too long ago, she mentioned her honey bunny, her sweetheart, the guy that she tells him which chores he has to do, but she's careful because he has bigger muscles than her, which is very hard to believe until you see this guy, then you understand. Because, you know, Vicky, she's pretty buff. So I said to myself, you know, I got to get this guy on the show because he sounds really, really interesting. And now here he is, Alexi Suplexi. Welcome to Duke Loves Rasslin, man. How you doing?
I am doing very good. Thanks for having me on. I'm not going to do the voice the whole time.
I was going to say, it's got to be tough to do the voice all the time, right?
Yeah, it really strains right down from the core.
Now, are you Russian? Is that a thing here?
Oh, you know, that's the dirty secret of Alexi Suplexi. I don't have a drop of Russian blood in me.
Incredible. So, because here's what I wonder about. You know, you might mess around and, you know, Vladimir might see you and say, oh, yes, that's you know, our favorite wrestler now. You know, he might try to adopt you. How would you even deal with something like that?
Oh, if Vladimir ever decided he was an Alexi Suplexi fan, I suppose I would have to cut a promo where I said that he needs to be put in his place.
I don't know how it'll work out. You know, Vladimir, he rides horses shirtless. So, you know, you gotta anyone who's man enough to do that, he must be pretty serious. You know what I mean? So that's
well. Hey, I grew up with horses. And I know how to take my shirt off. So I'll match him.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, you're a pretty buff dude, man. And I wonder about this because with Vicky Dreamboat, I mean, she got muscles upon muscles. And then we look at you and it's like, oh, that's a whole other level of that. So where does this come from? I mean, how long did it take you to sculpt this muscle-bound body of yours here?
You know, I guess I'm confused by that because Vicky is way more ripped and shredded and muscular than me, I suppose. I think I just have maybe good bone structure. I mean, I go to the gym with Vicky and we'll both kind of veer off and do our thing and do our squats and our deadlifts and stuff. But I don't have like the most rigorous particular workout regimen. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of wrestlers who have much more of it than me. One of the things that Vicky sometimes gets upset about it is I am sort of just blessed with biceps. I've barely done any curls in my life, and I just have biceps. So I don't know what to say about that other than I think I just I worked on a pumpkin farm in high school, and I just retained sort of farmer strength.
Now this is pretty serious. You worked on a pumpkin farm, so what does that mean? I mean, are you growing the pumpkins, or are you just picking them? What is this all about?
Oh, it meant that my aunt and uncle were pumpkin farmers in Wisconsin, and during football season, while all the other guys in high school were on the football team, I wanted to make, I was the early 2000s. I went to high school 2000 to 2004, and so $7 an hour cash felt like a lot of money to me. So I wanted to work out in the field and pick pumpkins. So that's what I did after school every day. Go there, and it was great, just be out in the sunshine and pick up tiny little pumpkins or great big pumpkins that it takes 2 or more guys to lift, and just walk through the field and do that. So that was my, job in high school.
Now, are you a guy that can actually, eat pumpkin now since you have that experience with actually picking it and working on a pumpkin farm? I mean, are we getting the pumpkin lattes and things like that?
No, I'm not really into those. I drink my coffee black. But I like pumpkin seeds and pumpkin pie, I suppose.
I'm going to give you a quick tip here. If you are ever out and about, I think Target and Walmart, places like that, Patti LaBelle's pumpkin pie, patty pies. Okay, it's usually
Patty
during the
pies.
holidays. I'm telling you right now, man, the best pumpkin pie you'll ever buy.
Okay, I wrote a note of it. I wrote it down.
There it is.
I like me some pumpkin pie.
You know who Patti LaBelle is, the famous singer and what have you, but she's also pretty serious about cooking. So I would be curious to hear what Alexi Suplexi thinks about patty pies. This might be a whole viral YouTube moment for you, man, since you're technically an expert on pumpkins.
Well, I got to tell you this. Vicky has recently taken up baking. For Christmas, she got a mixer and all the different baking supplies, and she bakes a lot now. So I can tell you, I already know for certain Patti LaBelle's pumpkin pie is not as good as Vicky's pumpkin pie. She hasn't even made one yet, but I'm 100% sure that's the case.
Happy wife, happy life. I know what's going on here. Alexi Suplexi is making sure that he stays out of the doghouse. This is very important here. But, Vicky's family, outside of you and your side of the family, don't they own like a bakery or something like that? She has experience with baking, right?
That's right. Vicky's mom is a very accomplished baker. She's got a business where she ships baked goods all over the country.
There it is. Sing you a song, bake you a cake, the whole 9 yards there. I love it. That's good stuff. Now talk to me about comedy, because this is a passion of yours, and it's something that you were so into that you decided to invest, basically your savings into opening up various comedy businesses, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah, so I guess I'll go back a ways. So I started doing improv comedy when I was in high school. So I suppose I was 16 at the time. And, I was into the theater department, and, me and my friends were kind of goofballs. And so one day the theater teacher, her name was Nancy, she handed me a letter that she got from a place called Comedy Sports in Milwaukee. And she said, go find out what this is all about. And it was a letter inviting high school kids to join their high school league. And so we went up there and we started taking the classes and stuff, and I fell in love with it. And then I started going and see the shows, and I fell in love with improv comedy. And so fast forward several years, I'm in college and I'm still doing improv on the weekends, and I'm taking classes and I'm doing some stand-up and, theater and all that. And then right after college, like very quickly after college, I got an email from the owner over at Comedy Sports, a guy named Dick Chudnow, inviting me to do a show. And I did the show, and I did a good job in it, I suppose. And so so then I became one of their pro players there, doing the Comedy Sports format, which I can tell you more about in a second. Which is very akin, like it's why I understood wrestling so well, is because Comedy Sports and wrestling have a very similar philosophy. But and then so I was a high school theater teacher for my shoot job, and then on the weekends I was doing improv comedy at Comedy Sports. And I did that for about 3 years. And, during the same time, I was also doing stand-up and a bunch of other stuff. And eventually I thought, well, I've kind of reached the ceiling of how much a guy can do comedy-wise in the city of Milwaukee. So I decided, what's my next move? And I knew I wasn't a New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago guy. Those places I knew they weren't going to fit my personality. So I just picked a city that seemed cool to me. I was a big fan of Soundgarden and Chris Cornell and Audio Slave. Maybe that was an influence on it, but I ended up picking Seattle. And part of that was because I knew there wasn't a Comedy Sports club in Seattle, and I thought to myself, I'm going to go there and I'm going to start a Comedy Sports. So I went there with that ambition in mind. Drove across the country. I took a really the really scenic route to get from Milwaukee to Seattle, the route that goes through New York and Texas. I did a huge loop around the country, and I stopped at as many improv comedy clubs that would have us as I could. And I just talked with the owners and got sort of a list of best practices in my mind. And then when I got to Seattle, I got a job that would, basically I was a parts delivery driver. It was a really awful job for a marine electronics company, but I took it because that was what was paying. And then I spent all of my free time building up this improv comedy troupe that was a comedy sports. So I applied for the license to get it and everything, and that was a whole process. But we didn't have a venue at first. We were sort of nomadic, performing where we could and when we could. And then after a year and change, we had kind of built up an audience, and I decided to, because of a variety of different factors, I decided it was time to find a venue of our own. And I really lucked out. I found this theater that was in this neighborhood called Fremont. That was sort of, at the time, it was sort of a speakeasy theater because no one knew it was there. It was behind a thrift store. And I lucked out because someone had told me that, a decade earlier there had been a theater in Fremont but no one could remember where it was. And I was just literally walking into businesses going, hey, does there happen to be a theater in the back room here? And eventually there was I walked into a thrift store and they said, yeah, actually there is a theater in the back room that we just use for storage. And so I rented out that theater and we started doing shows. Fast forward several years from there, the thrift store goes out of business and I take over the lease for the whole space. So we expand and we start using the additional space I built out a second theater and we're doing shows in there and we're teaching classes and during the week in both locations and all this. And I just built that and grew that, Improv Comedy Club for 10 years. So that was CSZ Seattle. So I could go on with the story, but I feel like that's a lot. You might have some questions.
Well, I mean, that's really, really interesting. I perked up when I heard that Chris Cornell thing there. You're a big fan of his music. Something about that guy is so different than what people may assume at first glance. Because, yeah, clearly he's a big fan of rock music, but he's obviously influenced by the blues and R&B. And you really start to notice it when you listen to some of the songs that he chose to cover.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you realize, oh, okay, so you're influenced by something that is an offshoot of this, or vice versa. But he's not just some hard rocking guy. There's a lot more layers to that dude. So it's interesting that you're a big fan of his.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I started listening to him, the Audio Slave albums. Audio Slave formed. I think they came out with their first album when I was in high school, and so I heard it on the radio and bought the album and listened to it until the CD was too scratched to listen to anymore, and then bought a new one and listened to that one. And then I was like, well, I wanted more, so I started to look back at Soundgarden, and then around that time, Chris Cornell started releasing solo stuff. And of course, then I was also discovering like Temple of the Dog and all this. And it was like, yeah, to your point, like, yeah, it's very bluesy in some of his stuff. He really slows it down. And basically anything with Chris Cornell and an acoustic guitar, I'm sold.
Yeah, same here, man. I mean, it's funny. He helped me understand Led Zeppelin. Because, you know Zeppelin exists, big rock, one of the biggest, greatest rock bands of all time. Yeah, sure. But listening to some of his covers made me go back and be interested in the originals, Thank You, some of these songs. And then it's like, oh, okay, whoa. All right, this is blues, man. This is blues rock, but it's blues.
Yeah. It's funny. The thing that made me understand Led Zeppelin was for years growing up, I didn't get it. I didn't like Led Zeppelin. I thought it's just kind of all over the place. They're just making noises. And then someone told me, Led Zeppelin doesn't make music. They make sex in the airwaves. And I listened to it through that lens, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is good."
Yeah, totally different perspective, right? It's funny. I like that. That actually makes a lot of sense because there are songs like "No Quarter" and songs like that, which are just so completely not a radio song.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of emotion there that makes sense. Sex on the airwaves. That makes a lot of sense there. It's interesting. Listening to your journey and knowing that, somebody like Cornell had such an influence over you, it starts to make you make more sense too. So,
Hmm.
talk to me about this comedy sports thing. I mean, I've never heard that term before. Is it? You said there's a philosophy behind it as well. What is this?
Yeah. So first, I'll tell you what comedy sports is. Comedy sports is improv comedy played as a sport. So, probably the improv comedy people are most familiar with is Whose Line Is It Anyway? That's the improv that did the best on TV. And every episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway, they say this is the show where everything's made up and the points don't matter. Well, comedy sports has a different philosophy. Everything's made up, but in comedy sports, the points do matter. It is a sport. So there's a referee and there's two teams of improv comedians, and they're competing to be the funnier team. And so there's a team in red jerseys and there's a team in blue jerseys. And, the referee is in charge of getting the suggestions and calling the fouls. So the fouls in a comedy sports match, there's two fouls. One foul is the out of bounds foul. That's the foul that just keeps it an all ages, family friendly show, so that you could bring the kids to it. Because if a player says anything that kind of goes out of bounds of family friendly content, then they lose a point for their team. But there's another foul called the groaner foul, which is if you say something that's too dad jokey, too punny, so that rather than the audience laughing, they groan, like how people to a dad joke. Well, if that happens, then the offending player has to make an apology to the audience for being so unfunny. And if the audience accepts their apology by a round of applause, they don't lose any points. But if they deny their apology, they lose a point for their team. And so, that's comedy sports. And there's comedy sports in over 25 cities around the country. If you're curious to find one near you, go to czworldwide.com or just type comedy sports worldwide. And you can find the nearest location. So obviously I started the one in Seattle and I started at the one in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee was the original. Milwaukee's it's a 200-seat arena with a full bar and restaurant. It's an awesome facility. So if you ever, and it's great shows. If you're ever passing through Milwaukee, go check out a show there. But like I said, there's comedy sports in a lot of cities around the country. And then your second question was the philosophy. Earlier I said that comedy sports and pro wrestling have a very similar philosophy. Well, the philosophy of comedy sports, as stated by the founder, Dick Chudnow, is we play to win, but we don't care if we lose. And that is to say, really, at the end of the day, winning is winning over the audience, making the audience care about the outcome, making the audience care about every game. And so you can see that there's some parallels there with wrestling.
Very interesting, very very interesting, and I'm very curious to see this executed. In the comedy sports sense there. I think that's something that I'm going to be looking into a little bit more. So I appreciate you plugging it and letting us know where around the nation we can get a there.
And real quick, by the way, if you want to see a really good example of that, you could go to alexgrindeland.com. That's my personal website, alexgrindeland.com. And if you click improv videos, the very first video is a Comedy Sports World Championships match from a couple years ago that takes place in my club in Seattle that I was the referee for. And it happened to be my Seattle club versus the Portland team. And so it's super fun, and I think you should check it out.
And I'll definitely I'll put the website in the notes of this episode, folks. So you'll definitely encourage you to check it out. I'm curious, in fact, I'll give my thoughts on it next week. So I'll check it out and then do a follow up on that because I'm very, very curious about this. It's interesting, Alexi, because I've been doing this show for close to 7 years now. In fact, right after WrestleMania, it would be the 7-year anniversary of Duke Loves Rasslin. And I have a couple other shows as well. So I'm coming up on. I've done nearly 1,000. I've interviewed nearly 1,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
That'll be the total amount of people that I've been in this. And I've learned to make it more of a conversation and less of an interview per se. Interviews are very stuffy. People get self-conscious. When you're just having a conversation, shooting the breeze, it's a lot easier to do. So I've learned to do that. But one of the things I've noticed is that it's very difficult for most people to think on their feet,
Mm-hmm.
at least out loud, to communicate on your feet, to answer questions and be able to transition and things like that. So that's why it's very important for whomever is facilitating the conversation. You know, you really have to be aware and pay attention in order to help your guests, you know, give them a life raft at times when they need it. So I bring that up because I think that improv is something that requires a tremendous amount of skill and a different type of intelligence, because you're constantly thinking on your feet and processing, and you have to know when to transition, which pro wrestling requires that as well. So it's really interesting. And I'm, you know, you brought up Whose Line Is It Anyway? That type of comedy, I can find something that I like, but I'm not really the biggest fan of it. But when I think of, you know, examples like The Office, especially the UK version, Veep, which is on HBO, these are shows that left room for improv. So, you know, there's some examples there. But the best example for me as a fan is Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
That type of improv is just fascinating to me because, yeah, they have a story that they need to tell, but a lot of what you hear in the middle is them just filling in the gaps and painting the picture there. And that really, again, you know, as somebody who has conversations with people on these shows, it's very difficult for people to think on their feet. So when you see something like that in action, it's like, whoa. Talk to me about the skill of improv, because I don't think a lot of people realize that that's exactly what it is. It's a skill, man.
I think a lot of times people say, improv, how could you practice improv, right? And the answer is sort of like, well, how do you practice basketball? You know, it's a series of skills that, you know, that you basically you have to have a tool belt, and as you learn more, you put more tools into your belt, and so you decide what tool to use at the appropriate time. So there's not, with a lot of things, people want there to be one silver bullet of like, what's the secret? What's the one thing I need to know to be better at improv? And there isn't one. There's just like there's a bunch of tools in a belt. Now, in terms of the skills, I'd say that there's one of them is just sort of getting comfortable in your own confidence. The way we say it is playing from a place of joy. And so this is to say that even if you've had kind of a crummy day, you got to well up artificial joy until you can trick your body and your mind into believing it's real joy. Because the audience will always reflect back to you what you're sending to them. So if the audience feels that you're nervous or scared or embarrassed, that's what we call the pucker factor. You know, I don't know what the content rating on your podcast here is, but I'll just say it. Their behinds will pucker up for you, and then they'll be tightened up, and they won't be able to laugh. The other way I would put it is like if people are leaning forward because they're trying to figure out what's going on, you know, with you or whatever, from that, if you picture a person sitting in a chair leaning forward, that's not a position that they're necessarily going to laugh from, because they're trying to do sort of like, they're trying to figure something out. It's a little bit like they're trying to do math, right? But as soon as you've made them so comfortable that because you come across as being confident, then they can just lean back in their chair and relax. And that is a physical body position that is, you know, physiologically more prone to people just enjoying what they're seeing. You know, you think about when you're just really enjoying a movie, you know, if it's the really intense part of the movie, sure, you're leaning forward. But if for the part where you're laughing, you're just busting a gut. It's because you've relaxed yourself, and you've relaxed yourself because you feel that what you're watching is confident in itself. And so we teach people, we teach classes, Improv Comedy 101, 201, 301, and we do it through both of my improv clubs. The one here in Jacksonville, First Coast Comedy, and the one in Seattle, which is CSZSeattle.com, which is shorthand for comedy sports. But we teach people the skills of showmanship, so to speak, how to play from a place of joy, and then sort of through that, let your genuine personality come out. I'm sure you've heard people in wrestling say that like the best wrestling personas are taking a real aspect of somebody's personality and just amplifying it. And I would say that that's the same for comedy. You can't go up there and try to be some other comedian you've seen. You got to find a way to make it your own. You've got to find a way to take real aspects of your personality and blow them up big enough to be stage worthy.
That's well said. Is well said, and I think that it's interesting because, in addition to all of this, you've taken these skills and you've put it into pro wrestling. I mean, what made you decide to give pro wrestling a try and add that to your tool belt as well?
Yeah, good question. So, a few years ago, not more than a few years ago now, because I was running the improv club in Seattle, it started to occur to me that most environments I was in, because now, when you're in entertainment, you hang out with other people in that same type of entertainment. And I just started to realize that in most of my social circles and places I was going and doing things and hanging out, I was sort of viewed as being the guy in charge. And that bleeds over in ways, like even if people are like, well, where are we going to go next? Are we going to go to this bar? Are we going to go to this restaurant? You could feel a certain amount of like people looking at me, and I'm like, no, I'm not the boss right now, And so, because you don't always want to be in charge of everything. So I decided I made a concerted effort to start taking on hobbies that where I was in no way, shape, or form the boss. And so one of those was I started taking Spanish classes. Just because I wanted to be back in that learner mindset of where I'm not an expert of what's going on. And then someone told me that there was a gym called Evolve Fitness that was at the time associated with 321 Battle, which was a now since no longer existent, but pro wrestling promotion in Seattle. It was an indie promotion, and they were teaching classes, and they had a weekly drop-in classes on I think it was Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and so I just signed up and started going to it and was like, this is awesome. And so I mean that's where I met Dean Cooper, the ultimate guy. At the time I just knew him as Cooper, and so I just started taking these, and I remember when I first started, the guy who was in charge of everything, his name was Steve. He said to me, what's your goal here? And I saw all these guys, I'm already at that point in my 30s. And so I didn't really have, I thought, oh, it'd be cool if someday I was in the shows, if I was wrestling, but I'm not in a rush because I get the performance juice every weekend. I do 4 or 5 shows a week for improv comedy. So I don't, and that also means that I can't do what a lot of these workers do, where they on the drop of a hat drive 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours to do a show, and then drive back the same night. Like I just didn't have. That's not the place in my life that I was at. So I was very happy to just go to the classes. It's it's a pretty good workout, and I'm learning. It's fun to be in that beginner position where you don't know things. I like learning. I like that experience. And so I just kept doing it, and then eventually, parallel to that. One of my competitor improv comedy clubs in Seattle, Jet City Improv, who, when I say competitor, I mean, I'm very friendly with all the managers over there. So it's sort of like, you can imagine, like if you're both in the same industry, we very much had the attitude of a rising tide lifts all ships. But in any case, I saw that they were putting up a show that was a parody of that show a parody of that show Glow on Netflix. And their show was called Glimmer. And so I thought, well, if I'm ever going to do a long run show that requires a bunch of rehearsals and everything, if I'm ever going to audition for one at a theater that I directly compete with, this is the one I want to do. And so I went and auditioned for it, and the director knew that I was already training pro wrestling, and I got cast, and Vicky was in the same cast. And that's how we met. We met in an improv comedy show that was about wrestling. And so myself and another worker named Carlina, she was primarily, but I was helping her to teach the ladies in the cast the little I knew at the time about wrestling so that their moves would look more authentic. And then I started, and I thought, well, hey, ladies, if you're going to be in a parody of wrestling, you should go do an actual wrestling training. And so I invited a bunch of them to come out to a wrestling training. And they did, and Vicky did. And then it was like maybe a week later, or a couple weeks, man, I don't know how long later, a month later, but we did 3 of these shows, and 3 or 4 of them. I don't remember exactly how many, but and they were a blast. They're super fun, funny shows. The girls knew that I was pretty comfortable getting beat up, so they just beat the snot out of me every show, pretty much. And then COVID happened and everything got shut down, and I couldn't train wrestling anymore. And so my friend Dean Cooper, he being a wrestler through and through, he couldn't take it. He didn't like this not being able to wrestle thing. So he just went ahead and bought a ring. And so then I started training there, and he invited Vicky to train there as well. And so now Vicky and we had already been getting to know each other pretty well, but now we're spending more time together, even training at in Dean Cooper's backyard, being trained by Dean Cooper. So that's a lot. I guess I'll pause there and see what kind of questions you got.
Well, okay. So this is the improv master over here, folks. So I asked him one question, he answered it, and he transitioned into something totally different, but even more interesting. So you were kind of a sly dog here. You were able to use pro wrestling to land your wife, basically, huh?
I mean, it's pro wrestling and improv. Yeah.
Wow. Look at that. Now, was this like a master plan, since you're a guy who is always thinking and practicing and things like this? Did you figure, you know what, she's a dreamboat, I got to have her. So, I'm going to do whatever it takes, man. We're going to do the comedy thing. We're going to do the wrestling thing. And every chance I get, I'm going to flex my amazing biceps here. And hopefully that'll land this dreamboat.
Well, to be sure, when I first met her, I was very enamored. And so I was, of course, finding reasons to invite her to do things. And it's like, I thought, oh, you want to go to a wrestling training with me? Oh, do you want to go get coffee? Oh, you want to, and because I wasn't going to be, we were in a show together, right? Like when you're in a cast together, you can't be too abrupt too quick, because if it goes south, you got to spend 6 more weeks of seeing each other all the time. And so I was, just taking it easy. But it pretty quickly became apparent that we both were making eyes at each other.
I love it, man. You sealed the deal. Okay, once again, you used your improv and pro wrestling skills to win the championship. Let's call it what it is there. So good stuff.
Yeah.
Again, shout out to Vicky Dreamboat. This is fun. So Alex, tell me what's in store in terms of the future now, because you have multiple comedy clubs. You're doing the pro wrestling thing, and you're the guy that everyone looks to for leadership in general. So what's 2023 have in store for you?
We've got a few things on the burners that I can't go into particular detail right now with, but basically we're thinking about more ways to get ourselves out there and make the comedy we're doing more accessible to a wider audience. And as far as wrestling, at least for me, my path with wrestling is going to basically maintain the course and speed, which is, I like to wrestle when it's fun, when I'm wrestling with my friends and I get to do a fun character and make the crowd laugh and shout some more and laugh some more.
Are we going to see more wrestling incorporated into your clubs?
Our club, in particularly the one in Florida, probably has more crossover with pro wrestling than just about any other improv club you can imagine, just because of obviously myself and Vicky perform there every week. And then as a result of that, we've got friends who are wrestlers who show up to the theater. The Renegade twins are not infrequently at at the theater, and others. So it's just one of our improv performers noted that. He was like, I can't imagine there's any other improv club that just happens to have more crossover with wrestling than this one.
Well, you know what? You got to settle something for me. I'm glad you brought them up. The Renegade Twins, great friends of the show. In fact, that's how I was introduced to Vicky Dreamboat. I had been keeping up with her wrestling anyway, but the Renegade Twins kind of put us together here. So I got a little thing going with them. It's a big problem. Other than me shouting out their lovely mother, Mama Renegade, who, I keep getting myself in trouble by bringing her up. But I shout her every chance I get, and I don't care what Charlotte has to say about that, or Robin, but that's another story. But I am a big fan of ice cream, just like the Renegade Twins are. But my favorite ice cream flavor is bubblegum ice cream. Okay, I'm old school. Not a lot of people know about bubblegum ice cream. You really got to be a big ice cream fan to know about that. And it's a thing, especially here on the East Coast. I'm in Boston. And the Renegade Twins seem to believe that that's the most disgusting thing they ever heard of. And I know, these are young people, so they don't know any better. You're a couple of years younger than me. You're not as young as they are. So you may be able to relate. So Alexi Suplexi, will you let the world know right now that bubblegum ice cream is the greatest flavor of ice cream on the planet, and the Renegade Twins are wrong?
Oh, so you want me to make that's a pretty controversial statement you're asking me to make there. I could lose a lot of followers. I could lose friends, So here's what I'll say. Personally, I don't chew bubblegum. I don't like it. I don't like the texture. The flavor's fine. And just as a consequence of me not liking bubblegum, I don't like bubblegum ice cream. But this is a subjective thing. To you, I celebrate you for finding the ice cream for you. For me, it's all the basics. It's all chocolate. It's all vanilla. It's all caramel.
Okay, so you were doing so well throughout nearly almost 40 minutes of the best content, and then you just did this heel turn. So I need Alexi Suplexi, in the words of the greatest of all time, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the man. I need you to get out of this business, get rid of your contracts, all of them. Even if you don't have a contract, sign one and then get rid of it. And I need you to get out of my life for the disrespect that you just gave bubblegum ice cream.
You will not speak to Alexi Suplexi in this manner. If you turn around, you will see I have already planted bears in your apartment there. They are behind you on chains, and at the snap of my finger, they will come and they will tear you to shreds.
That sounds very scary, so I don't want any part of that. Listen, Alexi, why don't you let everybody know? I know you mentioned your website once, but go down the list. Give everybody the information. What's the best way that they can keep up with you? And more importantly, check out your businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So my personal website, where you can find links to just about all of Alexi Suplexi's matches, is alexgrindeland.com, alexgrindeland.com. You can also follow Alexi Suplexi on Instagram as Alexi Suplexi, or on Twitter as Alexi Suplexi, or on Facebook as Alexi Suplexi. If you happen to be passing through Jacksonville, you can go to firstcoastcomedy.com, where you can see myself and Vicky performing in live improv comedy shows basically every single weekend, 4 times a weekend. You can also catch us often at the Colonial Oak in St. Augustine. We have a show there every Wednesday. And if you want to check out comedy sports and you're in Seattle, go check out the club that I own, and you can walk into CSZ Seattle. The website is cszseattle.com. I know that C, S, and Z all sound similar, so just Google Comedy Sports Seattle. You'll find it. And then you walk in and tell them you know Alexi Suplexi, and it will get you nothing. And that's what you should do.
Now, before I let you go, because I did this with your wife and it was a huge hit. So, that did not come out right. I'm sorry. I don't want any problems.
You have hit my wife. What is the matter with you? Release the bears.
You know what I mean? That's not good. But we talked about food, and Duke loves Rasslin, and Duke definitely loves food. And I enjoy talking to people about it, even though you kind of whiffed on the whole bubblegum ice cream thing. But let's see if you can redeem yourself. Your family I know that you're born and raised here in the United States, but is your family, do you have any other cultures mixed in there?
Yeah, so my family is very, very Norwegian.
So, and we're not talking about the cruise line, folks. We're talking about, legitimately the culture here. So let me ask you this. During the holidays, we want some Norwegian food. We need the real stuff. You know what I mean? What are we getting and why? So not just the name of it, but what actually is the dish and why?
First thing you want to get is some lefse. It would look to you like a tortilla that's just kind of rolled up, but it's actually like a very, very thin potato pancake. And there's many ways you can fill them with all manner of things in the same way you can fill a tortilla with all manner of things. But the Grindeland way of doing it is just butter and sugar, just a bunch of butter and a bunch of sugar. Roll it up. It's delicious. You got your starch, your sugar, your dairy. It's all the food groups right there. You're also going to want some krumkake. Krumkake would be like a thin, buttery cookie that is made in a particular krumkake press, so that it's sort of in the same way that a waffle kind of decorates it. It has a sort of a design on it. So get some lefse and some krumkake. And the other thing you need to know is if you drop your lefse or your krumkake on the floor, if you want to be a real Norwegian, you say ufta. Ufta is basically appropriate for any situation. If it's worse than dropping your lefse and your krumkake on the floor, if say maybe you get into a fender bender, you might say ufta neda, right? And if it's you get into a fender bender with a truck full of krumkake and lefse, and it all pours out onto the street and causes a 50-car pileup, then you might say ufta neda nemen har du sett. So these are the levels of ufta that you can use. And so if you want legitimacy around Norwegians, that's what you'll say.
Fantastic conversation there with our man, Alexi Suplexi. Really interesting guy. Really intelligent guy. Easy to talk to. Definitely has a lot to expand upon, which I love. I like engaging people. I like people who give you a little bit more than what you asked for, because it can help you better understand who you're talking to and what they're really about. And what I like is that the more, and this is for all you wrestlers out there, the more you're willing to open up, the more stuff fans can relate to. Alexi talking about the type of music he was into and how that's affected his life, and all the way down to where he chose to move and set up his business and things like that. That's a big deal, man. So that whole thing that we did talking about Chris Cornell, I mean, that wasn't planned, but that was a point that I can relate to. And I found that completely fascinating. And it's bigger than pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is related to it, but it's like, okay, so you're into this musician and the messages that they have in their music, and that's affected you so much that the trajectory of your life has changed because of this person and their art. That's fascinating to me. You know, that's fascinating. So really, really solid conversation there. A lot of meat on that bone, so to speak. And we definitely learned some new words and learned about some new foods. So that's always fun. That's right. Duke Loves Rasslin on Facebook, on Twitter. DukeLovesRasslin@gmail.com. As always, let me know what you think. Whatever or wherever you're listening to the show, please make sure you give us a 5-star review, thumbs up, whatever you want to call it there. I appreciate those, as always. Certainly. And that does it for this week, man. Listen, next week again, I'm definitely going to be putting out something on the genius Lanny Poffo. So stay tuned for that. Might put out 2 episodes next week. We'll see. Until then, be kind to yourselves and then be kind to others. Happy Valentine's Day. Take it away, Tony Schiavone.
Mr. Tony Schiavone, and we're desperately out of time on Duke Loves Wrestling.